Chosen one, anchor your spirit to every word I'm about to say right now. That restlessness you've been carrying, the one that doesn't have a name yet, stop pushing it down. The enemy is working overtime today for one reason, and one reason only. He has seen the assignment that heaven just stamped with your name on it. It all shifts in the next 24 hours. The invisibility, the waiting, the feeling that you've been overlooked by everyone who should have seen you by now. But understand this, and understand it clearly, it is not ending because of chance. It is ending because of what you have done in the hidden place. Think back to that moment this week when you kept going when no one was watching. When you honored something no one would have noticed if you had abandoned it. When you did the right thing in a room where the only witness was God. You didn't know it then, but that quiet faithfulness was a signal flare shot straight into heaven. That moment of unseen obedience was the moment they began building security around your next chapter. You didn't delay your destiny, you qualified for it. Heaven blocked everything competing for your attention today just to deliver this verdict to you directly. So settle your spirit, because I'm about to read the decree that explains the weight you've been carrying. You did not find this message by accident. The algorithm did not bring you here. The Most High did. This is a divine appointment written into the calendar of eternity before your name was ever spoken on this earth. You are not stumbling forward. You are being escorted. Stay until the very last second of this message, because in the next few minutes, I'm going to hand you the prophetic verdict that explains why your profile has been escalating in the spirit realm. I'm going to walk you through the exact transition happening around your life right now, so you can see the protection being assembled and understand why the enemy has suddenly gone quiet. And at the end, I'm going to give you the declaration that seals your new assignment and shuts every door on the season that was trying to keep you small. Do not leave this message early. Your future self, the one standing in rooms you haven't imagined yet, is asking you to stay. Because what gets released at the end of this message is the key that unlocks the next chapter. I know what the last 72 hours have felt like for you. The atmosphere around your life hasn't just been still, it's been charged. Like something enormous is rearranging itself just outside your line of sight. Maybe you've had this inexplicable sense of being watched this week. Not in a way that frightened you, but in a way that made you pause and ask yourself why everything suddenly feels different. Or maybe you woke up at 3 inches the morning and instead of anxiety, you felt something closer to anticipation, like your spirit knew something your mind hadn't caught up with yet. Or perhaps you've noticed that certain people have started treating you differently, more carefully, like they sense something shifting around you that they cannot explain and will not admit. You feel it too. Something is different. You are being repositioned. And in the middle of this repositioning, the enemy has started whispering a very specific lie into the silence. Listen carefully to your own thoughts this week. He's been telling you that the reason things feel quiet is because you've been passed over. He's been replaying every moment you weren't chosen, every room you weren't invited into, every opportunity that seemed to go to someone less prepared than you. That colleague who got the recognition, that person who seemed to move forward while you stayed still, that moment when you poured everything into something and received nothing visible in return. The accuser is telling you that the quiet means rejection. He's telling you that God's silence in this season is evidence that your moment already came and you missed it. He wants you to believe that the protection being built around your life is actually a wall keeping blessing out, not a perimeter being established before your expansion. But I need you to hear what the scripture actually says about this moment. Psalm 91:11 says, "For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways." Listen to that word. He will command his angels concerning you. Not around you in general, concerning you specifically. That means heaven has received a specific briefing about your life. A specific assignment has been given. Security does not get dispatched for someone who is not carrying something valuable. You do not build a perimeter around an empty field. You build it around something that matters, something that is about to be revealed. The quiet you have been interpreting as abandonment is actually the sound of a security detail being assembled around your next season. The silence is not rejection, it is preparation. The invisibility you have been grieving is not punishment, it is protection. They do not announce the arrival of something important before the security is in place. You have not been forgotten. You have been held back on purpose, not because of your failure, but because of the size of what is coming. You think the waiting has been wasted time. You think the hidden seasons were setbacks. But let me reframe your reality right now. The hiddenness was not a holding cell. It was a training ground. And the people who overlooked you did not disqualify you. They simply were not authorized to see you yet. You are not being ignored. You are being guarded. And very soon, what heaven has been protecting will be put on public display, and the same world that did not notice you will not be able to look away. Hit the like button if this message found you at the exact moment you needed it. Drop a comment below. What is one area of your life where you felt invisible this season? And after this message, you're beginning to wonder if that invisibility was actually protection. They are not threatened by who you used to be. They are threatened by who you are becoming. And that distinction, that tiny but seismic shift in understanding, is the difference between a person who survives the attack and a person who walks through it with their purpose fully intact. Because people can tolerate your past. They can tolerate the version of you that stayed predictable, the version that kept your gifts folded up like wings you were afraid to open, the version that apologized for taking up space. They can tolerate you when you are easy to categorize. But when God begins to pull you forward, when your spirit starts standing up inside your own body, when you stop negotiating your worth and you begin to move with clarity, that is when the atmosphere changes. That is when the same people who once clapped politely begin to watch quietly. That is when the whispers start. Not because you became evil, not because you became arrogant, not because you became too much, but because you became aligned. And alignment is disruptive to anything built on control, manipulation, or spiritual complacency. The moment you begin becoming who heaven intended, you become a mirror. And many people do not hate you. They hate what your obedience reveals in them. Your growth makes their stagnation loud. Your courage makes their fear visible. Your healing exposes their preference for wounds they can predict. So the pushback is not always about what you did. Many times it is about what you are about to do. It is not always about your history. It is often about your trajectory, and that is why this is spiritual. It is why it feels irrational. It is why doors close that should have stayed open. It is why favor shifts. It is why even your own mind sometimes becomes unfamiliar terrain, because becoming is a holy disturbance. Becoming is the shaking of everything that cannot go with you. Becoming is the sound of chains realizing they are about to lose their grip. Most people, when the opposition comes, when the doors suddenly close, when the relationships start to feel strange, when the very ground beneath them begins to shift, most people turn inward and ask, "What did I do wrong?" They assume the resistance is a verdict. They treat the warfare like a warning. They scan their recent steps like a courtroom transcript, searching for the moment they messed up, the sentence they spoke wrong, the day they failed to pray hard enough. They start rewriting the story as if the discomfort is evidence that God is displeased. But what if the pressure you are feeling right now is not punishment? What if it is confirmation? What if the very friction you are experiencing is not God rejecting you, but God proving that you are moving? Because only something in motion meets resistance. Only a door you are actually approaching can be slammed in your face. Only a light that is brightening attracts the attention of darkness. Scripture has always been honest about this. Do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. The Bible does not say trials mean you're cursed. It says trials can be the proving ground. James wrote that the testing of your faith produces perseverance, and perseverance must finish its work, so you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing. That means some of what you are calling attack is actually development. Some of what you are calling delay is actually training. Some of what you are calling rejection is protection in disguise. And what if the reason they are moving against you is because something in the unseen realm already knows what you have not yet fully believed about yourself? What if the resistance is not responding to your current level, but to your next level? What if hell is reacting early because heaven has already spoken? What if the warfare is happening because the oil is on you, and oil always makes you visible in a room full of dry religion and dry ambition? What if the enemy's urgency is because your yes is closer than you think? There are seasons when the opposition seems excessive compared to what you have outwardly done, and that is because the opposition is not measuring your activity. It is measuring your authority. It is not responding to your resume. It is responding to your destiny. It is why Joseph could be hated while still a teenager, before he ever ruled anything. It is why the brothers could feel threatened by a dream. Nothing had happened yet except a glimpse. But a glimpse is enough to provoke insecurity. A glimpse is enough to activate envy. A glimpse is enough to trigger a system that survives by keeping you small. And when you're chosen, even your potential carries weight in the spirit. Some messages don't just inform, they activate. If something stirred deep in your spirit just now, you may be ready to receive the chosen one's blueprint. This sacred guide reveals the 8 divine patterns behind your calling, your suffering, and your destiny. It also comes with the full audiobook, so you can absorb it during prayer, rest, or quiet moments with God. And for those called to speak His truth, you'll also receive Activating Your Prophet Mantle, a powerful bonus ebook for those carrying a prophetic assignment. The link is in the first pinned comment, but only for a limited time. Now, let that settle, because what I am about to walk you through is not theory. It is not motivation. It is a map, and it begins with the one thing that most people in your position are getting completely wrong. You have been trying to protect your peace by shrinking. You have been pulling back, going quiet, making yourself smaller in rooms where your presence alone shifts the atmosphere. You started dimming the very light God gave you because you noticed it made some people uncomfortable. You started editing your words, softening your convictions, swallowing your discernment, pretending you didn't notice what you noticed. You began to confuse peace with absence. You began to confuse harmony with agreement. You thought that if you could just stay unbothered and unnoticeable, the warfare would pass you by. You thought you could avoid the arrows by hiding the target. You thought that was wisdom. You thought that was discernment. But here is what heaven sees. What looks like humility from the outside is sometimes self-erasure in disguise. And it is subtle. It doesn't come dressed as rebellion. It comes dressed as, I don't want problems. It comes dressed as, I'm just being low-key. It comes dressed as, I'm not trying to offend anyone. But there is a difference between lowering yourself before God and lowering yourself before people who were never meant to define you. One is surrender. The other is slow spiritual suffocation. Surrender is when you bow so God can lift you. Self-erasure is when you bow so people can step on you. Surrender produces life. Self-erasure produces numbness. Surrender makes you soft toward God and strong against darkness. Self-erasure makes you quiet toward darkness and distant from God. And the enemy knows that if he cannot destroy you loudly, he will do it quietly by convincing you that disappearing is the same thing as being wise. That is why he tempts you toward invisibility. Not because you aren't valuable, but because you are. If he can get you to associate your calling with conflict, your gifting with rejection, your obedience with loneliness, then you will start retreating before the race even begins. And the tragedy is that you will call it peace while your spirit is starving. You will call it maturity while your soul is shrinking. You will call it waiting on God while God is waiting on you to stand up. Think about David before he became king. He was not hidden in the palace. He was hidden in the field. The field is not glamorous. The field is where you smell like sheep. The field is where your hands get dirty. The field is where you are responsible for what cannot pay you back. The field is where you learn faithfulness when no one is clapping. And while he was in the field, he was fighting lions and bears that nobody witnessed. Nobody wrote about it. Nobody celebrated it. Nobody called him anointed after that night. There was no audience for his courage. No platform for his obedience. Just a teenager with a sling, a staff, and a decision. Either he would protect what belonged to his father, or he would let fear take what was assigned to him. And that is where your real formation happens, in the moments nobody sees, when the only reward is integrity, when the only witness is God. But God was watching every single battle, and every single victory in that hidden place was building something in David that the throne would later require. Because a throne doesn't just require talent, it requires capacity, it requires restraint, it requires discernment, it requires a heart that can handle both applause and betrayal. It requires a spirit that can be surrounded by influence and still stay surrendered. And the field builds that. The hidden place builds that. Your obscurity is not your obstacle. It is your preparation ground. The battles no one sees are producing the character that public destiny demands. And you need to know this. The lion you're fighting privately is not random. The bear you're wrestling in secret is not pointless. Those are training partners. Those are weight sets. Those are the resistance bands of your destiny. God is strengthening your spiritual muscles where nobody can applaud you, because later, when people do applaud you, you won't become addicted to it. God is teaching you how to win without witnesses, so you can lead without needing validation. And yes, it hurts. Yes, it feels unfair. Yes, it feels like you're doing the most with the least. But the field is where God teaches you that you do not need a crowd to carry courage. You only need covenant. But here is where it goes deeper, and this is the part most people miss entirely. David did not just survive the wilderness, he worshipped through it. That matters, because survival alone can harden you. Survival alone can make you suspicious. Survival alone can teach you to protect your heart by closing it. But worship keeps you tender while you're under pressure. Worship keeps your spirit facing upward when everything around you is collapsing inward. While Saul was chasing him, while the very institution that should have protected him was trying to destroy him, David was writing psalms. He was taking his fear and turning it into prayer. He was taking betrayal and turning it into intimacy with God. He was taking the ache of being misunderstood and turning it into language that generations would later sing. That is not denial. That is transmutation. That is alchemy of the spirit, taking pain and turning it into praise, not because the pain is good, but because God is still God in the pain. He was converting his suffering into sacred expression, and that act, the act of turning pain into purpose in real time, is precisely what kept him from becoming bitter. Because bitterness is not just anger. Bitterness is a narrative. It is the story you start telling yourself where God is always late, people are always dangerous, and love is always a trap. Bitterness makes you interpret everything through the lens of offense. And for chosen people, bitterness is lethal. Not because it means you're bad, but because it dulls your discernment. It contaminates your compassion. It makes you react instead of respond. It makes you punish the present for what happened in the past. Bitterness is the one thing that can disqualify a chosen person, not because God removes the calling, but because the called person removes themselves from it by closing their heart. God does not revoke the gift, but you can refuse the process. You can keep the title and lose the tenderness. You can keep the platform and lose the purity. And David, even with his flaws, had something the enemy could not easily corrupt: a heart that stayed open toward God. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. That is a man who refuses to let the wilderness make him wicked. That is a man who refuses to let pursuit turn him into a predator. And that is the invitation for you too. Do not let what hurt you decide who you become. Let God decide. And what is coming next will likely surprise you, because it always does at this point in the journey. There is a wound that has not fully healed. You know the one. It's the thing you almost never bring up because you don't want to reopen it. It's the moment you replay when you're alone, not because you want to, but because it still has a hook in your nervous system. It's the betrayal that made you question your discernment. It's the abandonment that made you question your worth. It's the rejection that made you think love must be earned. It's the season you can describe factually without crying, but your body still remembers. You have prayed over it, spoken faith over it, declared breakthrough over it, and yet, in certain quiet moments, when the room is still and no one is watching, it still throbs. And you have told yourself that it does not affect you anymore. But it does. Not because you are weak, because it was never properly named. And what you do not name, you cannot truly surrender. What you do not acknowledge, you cannot fully heal. Healing does not begin with moving forward. It begins with turning around, looking directly at what happened, and calling it exactly what it was. Not in bitterness, not in blame, but in the kind of ruthless spiritual honesty that says that was real, that left a mark, and I am no longer going to pretend it did not shape the way I move through the world, because pretending doesn't protect you, it only postpones you. And delayed healing does not disappear. It leaks. It leaks into your tone. It leaks into your decisions. It leaks into your relationships. It leaks into your theology. Unhealed wounds make you interpret God through the face of the person who hurt you. They make you flinch when blessing approaches. They make you suspicious of kindness. They make you hear correction as rejection. And that is why the Holy Spirit keeps circling back to that place, not to shame you, but to free you. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, Scripture says, and He saves those who are crushed in spirit. That means God is not intimidated by your ache. He is not offended by your tears. He is not asking you to perform strength. He is inviting you into truth, because truth is the doorway to freedom. Jacob wrestled with the angel through the night, and the text says, the angel struck him in the hip in his strength, in his stride, in the very thing he walked on. That is not accidental detail. God touched the place that carried Jacob forward. God marked his movement, and Jacob limped for the rest of his life. But he also walked away with a new name. He went in as Jacob Heel-Grabber, striving, surviving, manipulating outcomes because he didn't trust provision. He came out as Israel, one who wrestles with God, one marked by encounter, one transformed by contact with the divine. That limp was not a flaw. That limp was proof of the encounter. Some of what you have been ashamed of, some of what you have been hiding about your story, is not your weakness, it is your evidence. It is the mark of a person who engaged with God at the deepest level and refused to let go. You have been embarrassed by the limp because you thought it meant you were damaged. But in the spirit, the limp can be a certificate. It can be the sign that you have wrestled for your blessing. The limp can mean you stopped pretending you were self-made. The limp can mean you encountered God in a way that rearranged you. And yes, It changes how you walk. You don't run the same after grief. You don't trust the same after betrayal. You don't speak the same after the wilderness. But a holy limp can make you more compassionate, more discerning, more dependent on God, less impressed with image, and more committed to substance. Stay with me, because what is coming next is the part that actually breaks the cycle, and most people abandon the process right before they get there. Because right before breakthrough, it often feels like exposure. It often feels like weakness. It often feels like you're unraveling instead of rising. But unraveling is sometimes the mercy of God. It is the removal of what cannot sustain you in the next season. Once you stop hiding the wound and start letting it speak, not to people who cannot hold it, but to the God who already sees it, something in you begins to realign. Not overnight, not always dramatically, but unmistakably. The posture changes, the prayer changes. Your prayers stop being a performance and start being a conversation. You stop decorating your pain with religious language, and you start bringing God the real thing. You stop saying, "I'm fine, Lord," when you're not. You stop pretending you're over it when you're still bleeding. And the moment you do that, you make room for God to do what only God can do. Heal beneath the surface, not just manage symptoms. You stop asking to be rescued, and you start asking to be equipped. That is the shift. That is the moment when you go from someone waiting on God to someone partnering with God. You stop waiting for God to remove the obstacle, and you ask God to increase your capacity. You stop praying, "Take this away," and you begin praying, "Teach my hands to war. Teach my heart to stay clean. Teach my mind to stay steady. Teach my mouth to speak life." And that partnership looks different from the outside than most people expect. It is not always loud. It is not always celebrated. In fact, in its earliest stages, it often looks like isolation, like you are being removed from everything familiar, stripped of everything comfortable, and left in a place that feels more like a holding room than a launching pad. It can feel like God is taking things away, friendships that no longer fit, opportunities that once felt like doors, even habits that used to soothe you. And it can feel confusing because the removal does not always come with an immediate replacement. But that is how God builds faith that is not dependent on environment. He teaches you to find Him when the scenery changes. He teaches you to trust His voice when the crowd disappears. He teaches you that your identity is not tied to your access. John the Baptist decreased so Christ could increase. Moses left Pharaoh's palace and went into the desert. Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness before he ever began his public ministry. Wilderness is not a sign you're rejected. It is often the sign you're being prepared for authority that cannot be produced in comfort. But Elijah knew that place. After the fire, after the earthquake, after the wind, the voice of God came in the stillness, not in the spectacle, the still, small voice. And here is what I want you to understand about that moment. Elijah was not in that cave because he had failed. He was in that cave because he was being recalibrated. He had just confronted false prophets. He had just watched fire fall. He had just outrun a chariot. And then one threat from Jezebel shook him so deeply he asked to die. That's how intense spiritual warfare can be. You can have a victory and still feel vulnerable. You can have miracles and still feel exhausted. You can be used by God and still need God to restore you. And God did not shame Elijah for being human. God fed him. God let him sleep. God strengthened him for the journey. And then, in the cave, God did not come to condemn him. God came to ask him a question. What are you doing here? Not as a rebuke, as an invitation. What is the real thing beneath the surface? What are you actually carrying? What story are you telling yourself right now? What fear has grown bigger than the truth? And Elijah answered with his whole heart, raw and unfiltered. He said, "I am the only one left, and they are trying to kill me." That is despair talking. That is isolation talking. That is trauma talking. And God did not argue with his feelings. He simply reoriented him. He showed him there were 7,000 others he did not know about. In other words, your pain has lied to you about your aloneness. Your fear has lied to you about your future. Your exhaustion has lied to you about your effectiveness. And then he gave him his next assignment. God did not let Elijah build a permanent home in the cave. He met him there, then moved him forward. That is what God does with you. He does not despise your cave season. He does not abandon you in it, but he does not intend for you to identify with it. Your isolation is not abandonment. It is interrogation of the most loving kind. God is asking you, "What are you doing here?" And the honest answer, spoken without performance, is the doorway through. Because when you finally tell the truth, "I'm tired, I'm scared, I feel overlooked, I feel betrayed, I don't know how to trust again," you stop wrestling in the dark. You bring the battle into the light. And darkness cannot keep what is exposed. Now this is where we enter something that most conversations about spiritual warfare deliberately avoid, because it is uncomfortable, and it should be, because it is the thing that is actually keeping you locked. It is easier to talk about enemies out there than it is to talk about agreements in here. It is easier to point to a person than it is to confront a pattern. It is easier to rebuke a demon than it is to surrender an identity you used to survive. But if you want real freedom, you have to be willing to let God touch what you protect. The opposition you are facing is real. The people who have come against you, some of them knowingly, some of them as instruments they do not even understand, they are real. The closed doors are real. The isolation is real. The spiritual heaviness is real. The way your phone got quiet is real. The way opportunities stalled is real. The way certain people suddenly misunderstood you is real. But here is the confrontation you were not expecting. Some of the warfare in your life right now is not external, it is internal. And the internal warfare is not coming from your wounds or your past or even your unbelief. It is coming from your identity, specifically from the version of your identity that was formed before you understood who you were. There is a self you built in survival mode, a self that learned how to read a room so you could avoid being targeted, a self that became hyper-independent because you couldn't trust anyone to stay, a self that learned to perform excellence because love felt conditional, a self that learned to be easy because being honest had consequences, a self that learned to anticipate disappointment so it wouldn't crush you when it arrived. A self that learned to accept crumbs because asking for bread felt like too much. And that self, as understandable as it was, as necessary as it once may have been, that self cannot carry what God is now placing in your hands. It is not equipped for it. It was not designed for it. You can't enter a new season with an old operating system. The calling is too weighty. The mantle is too real. The assignment requires wholeness, not just talent. The next season requires you to be able to receive love without suspicion, correction without collapse, blessing without sabotage, visibility without self-hatred, and the dissonance you feel, the tension between who you are becoming and the way you still sometimes respond, still sometimes retreat, still sometimes speak about yourself. That tension is the real battleground. That's why sometimes you can feel faith and fear in the same day. That's why you can feel cold and unworthy in the same breath. That's why you can be ready to obey and still feel the reflex to run. That's the old self panicking because it senses its control is ending. Paul understood this when he wrote about putting off the old self and putting on the new. This was not a religious metaphor. It was a description of an active, ongoing, sometimes painful internal dismantling. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind, he said. Renewal implies replacement. It implies that some thoughts do not get managed, they get evicted. Some beliefs do not get negotiated with, they get crucified. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. That is not poetic. That is war language, because the old self does not go quietly. It argues. It presents logic. It reminds you of everything that went wrong the last time you stepped forward. It reminds you of the time you trusted and got hurt, the time you tried and got laughed at, the time you spoke up and got punished. It points to your scars and calls them prophecies of your future. It tells you, don't risk it. Don't say that. Don't apply. Don't start. Don't show up. It speaks in your own voice. And that is why it is so hard to recognize, because it sounds like wisdom, it sounds like caution, but it is actually the voice of a past self that has outlived its season. It is the voice of Egypt trying to keep you from Canaan. It is the voice of the familiar trying to keep you from the promised. And here is the unexpected thing, the thing that reframes everything you have just heard. The enemy has not been your greatest obstacle in this season. Your greatest obstacle has been your agreement with a version of yourself that God has already moved past. Every time you said, "This is just how I am," every time you made your coping mechanism your personality, every time you called your fear discernment when it was really intimidation, every time you deferred your calling to a future version of yourself that somehow had more resources, more healing, more permission, every time you waited to feel ready before you moved, that was not humility. That was a covenant with limitation. It was you signing your name under a lie that said you must be perfect to be used. But God has never required perfection. He requires surrender. He requires obedience. He requires faith that moves even when feelings shake. Look at Moses, stutter and all. Look at Gideon, fear and all. Look at Jeremiah, youth and all. God does not call the qualified, He qualifies the called. But the old self wants you to believe you must become acceptable before you can become obedient. And God has been engineering every closed door, every stripped away comfort, every forced period of stillness, not to punish that agreement, but to break it. Because some agreements don't break through information, they break through pressure. Some mindsets don't leave because you learned something new. They leave because God allows a season that proves the old way cannot sustain you. When God removes certain crutches, it is not cruelty, it is deliverance. When God interrupts a path you were determined to stay on, it is not rejection, it is redirection. When God lets you feel the emptiness of a role you used to hide in, it is not humiliation, it is awakening. You are not behind. You are not disqualified. You are not too broken. You are in the precise moment where the old self is being asked to step aside so the chosen self can step forward. And the chosen self is not a fantasy version of you with no scars. The chosen self is you, surrendered. You, healed enough to be honest. You, humble enough to keep growing. You, brave enough to obey. You, awake enough to stop negotiating your identity with people who don't have access to your assignment. And the security that heaven is placing around you, the angelic assignment that was spoken over at the beginning of this message, it is not there to protect who you used to be. It is there to escort who you are about to become. Because where you're going has resistance, but it also has covering. It has opposition, but it also has authority. It has testing, but it also has provision. The Lord goes before you, and He is your rear guard. He prepares a table before you in the presence of your enemies, not after they leave, not when it gets quiet, in their presence, which means you are not waiting for warfare to end before you thrive. You are learning to walk with God through it. Place your hand on your heart and declare this with me. I release the version of myself that was built in survival. I release every agreement I made with limitation, with fear, with smallness. I break covenant with the labels placed on me by people who could not see what heaven already knew. I am not behind. I am not forgotten. I am not disqualified. I am in preparation. I am in transition. I am under divine assignment and divine protection. The attacks against me are confirmation of my calling, not condemnation of my character. I step forward not when I feel ready, but because I have been made ready by everything I have already endured. I am chosen, I am seen, I am equipped, and I walk into this next season knowing that what has been assigned to me cannot be taken from me, because it was placed in me before I was born. And let that declaration do more than sound good. Let it become a boundary in the spirit. Let it become a line you stop crossing back over, because the moment you release survival, you will feel exposed at first. You will feel like you lost your armor. But you didn't lose armor, you lost bondage. Survival mode is not armor, it is a cage you learned to decorate. And when you step out of it, your nervous system may shake because it has learned to associate freedom with danger. But keep walking, keep praying, keep renewing your mind, keep speaking truth over yourself. Because the more you practice sonship and daughterhood, the more foreign fear becomes. The more you practice obedience, the less seductive comfort becomes. The more you practice being loved by God, the less you'll beg humans to approve you. And you will start noticing something. The same things that once triggered you will begin to lose power. The same voices that once intimidated you will begin to sound small. The same environments that once drained you will no longer have access to your peace. Not because you became hard, but because you became anchored. Not because you became indifferent, but because you became rooted. Like a tree planted by streams of water, bearing fruit in season, leaf not withering. That is what God is doing in you. Rooting you where drought cannot take you out, grounding you where storms cannot uproot you. If this message confirmed something your spirit already knew, do not let this moment pass without acting on it. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below, even one word about what God revealed to you today. Your testimony is part of someone else's breakthrough. And if you are ready to go deeper into understanding your divine assignment, everything you need is in the first pinned comment below. Do not scroll past it. It was placed there for you.